tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
We're not fully out of this yet, but I feel confident that we can safely make some further changes.
You will no longer have to wear a mask in indoor public spaces in BC as of tomorrow.
Is it a good idea?
I'll probably stick with it.
It doesn't affect us.
Well, continue to wear ours.
The big changes coming to our pandemic restrictions.
It's almost like your duty as a human being to help other individuals in need.
In the middle of war, a Vancouver man is in Ukraine trying to get supplies to those who need it.
My symptoms are definitely worse this year.
And 'tis the season already. Doctors warn allergies could be very bad this year because of climate change.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
On one hand, I'm pretty happy, but on the other hand, I'm kind of scared. Like, is it a good idea?
I think I'll still wear a mask in certain situations, public transit, on a plane and stuff like that. But I'm getting kind of old and I'm getting kind of forgetful, and I have to go home all the time to pick up my mask. So I'm relieved that this may be over.
We'll be back with a mandate in 6 months or so.
Putting a mask on is not that hard, so I'm happy that it's lifting because it means things are getting better, but I don't think will impact me too much.
Somebody needs to be concerned, because if everyone doesn't care, they're like, oh, we're free, then it's just going to come right back.
You're sick, wear a mask. Don't get other people sick. So I think having that consciousness moving forward would be nice.
When it comes to health, I mean, you got to be careful. So, I'm for caution.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. BC is dropping its mask mandate at midnight tonight, 2 years to the day since the World Health Organization declared a global COVID-19 pandemic. Reaction, as you heard, is a mix of hope and caution. Belle Puri joins us now to explain the changes coming our way tomorrow and beyond. Belle.
The changes will come in 2 batches. The first tomorrow, the second if hospitalization and case numbers stay low in a month from now. For many people, of course, the big change will be no more masks in public indoor places. As of 12:01 tonight, wearing a mask will be optional, not mandatory, in places like the grocery store, the mall, and also on public transit. That said, masks will still be required at medical clinics. Now, if a business chooses to require masks, that's their right. For schools, the mask mandate will be lifted in the K-12 system after the March break. Also starting tomorrow, long-term care visitations will be restored as quickly as facilities can manage. The overnight child and youth camp order will be lifted, so summer camp is on, and there will be no more capacity limitations on faith gatherings. Officials say these changes are possible now for 2 reasons.
First, because people in British Columbia have stepped up and protected themselves and their families by getting vaccinated. And second, because people have followed these safety measures we've put in place when it was necessary to do so. The need for every single one of these particular layers of protection has dropped below the threshold where we need to have an order for them to be in place.
A month from now, on April 8th, more restrictions will ease. The big one this time, vaccine cards and proof of vaccination status will no longer be required. Businesses will be able to transition from COVID-19 safety plans back to communicable disease plans. Post-secondary residents' vaccine requirements will be lifted.
A lot of new information today, Belle. People's daily lives may soon begin to change. Does Dr. Henry suggest the pandemic may soon be over?
No, we're in a transition phase where there is room to relax some of the protective measures. For instance, mandating all healthcare workers in private practice, like doctors, dentists, chiropractors, to be vaccinated has now been changed to adopting an informed consent system for patients.
What we've done is taken a look at the multiple different colleges and different regulated health professionals, and we're taking a more nuanced risk-based approach. For some, that will mean that you must be vaccinated to practice in certain settings, but we're doing that on a more tailored basis to each of the regulated health professions.
At the end of the day, with more and more restrictions being removed, it's up to individual British Columbians now to assess their comfort of risk and how to manage it, which is a challenge particularly for the elderly and those who are immunocompromised. Officials admit the risk now is much lower, but it's not zero, and we're not fully out of this pandemic yet.
Thank you, Bill. Bill Puri reporting for us tonight. Now, despite all those changes, not everyone is eager, understandably, to get rid of the masks just yet. For one Kamloops piano teacher, she's keeping them obligatory for now. She says it's as much about her students as it is about her.
A lot of my students also live with grandparents or vulnerable people in their family. And due to the fact that I don't have like a lot of open windows in my studio and it's a smallish space and we're quite close, we've all worked as a team to try to keep everybody safe.
Here in Metro Vancouver, one shop owner says they're not flipping the page just yet. Massey Books says their mask policy will stay for now.
It's really important that staff wear masks to protect one another and the people in our lives, as well as our customers. When we first announced that masks were mandatory in our store, we got a lot of positive feedback from our customers saying, like, thank you for taking care of us, thank you for taking our health into consideration.
The owner says she's consulting staff and customers and says there is no rush, but she will take time to make a decision. Now, as Bell reported, masks are no longer required on public transit, with the exception of HandyDart. That does not sit well with all passengers. More than 1,300 people have now signed a petition calling for a mask mandate to remain. The organizer says masks keep people safe when they board crowded buses and the SkyTrain.
You have to remember that there's no vaccine card requirement and no capacity limit right now on transit. So you can be on a shoulder-to-shoulder vehicle, and there hasn't been any verification of what's everybody's vaccination status. So the only protection, the only measure that we have is masks.
He points to other cities like Toronto, where most mask mandates are being lifted, but still in effect on transit. Amid all this, COVID hospitalizations in BC are dropping closer to pre-Omicron levels. Take a look. With 17 fewer COVID-positive patients in care, hospitalizations are below 400 for the first time since early January. 52 people are in critical care, and 4 more people have died from the virus. BC's death toll is now more than 2,900. Today's COVID-19 rule changes may have left you with a lot of questions, and now is your chance to ask them. Infectious diseases specialist Dr. Srinivas Murthy will take your questions live later in the newscast. He will join us at 6:30 tonight. You can email your questions to bcasks@cbc.ca or give us a call at 604-662-6801. We've already received quite a number, so please keep your questions as short and clear as possible. The pandemic pulled many of us together and then, it seems, pushed some of us even further apart. To some of the findings in a new survey by the Angus Reid Institute conducted in partnership with CBC News. As our Thomas Dagley explains, the results indicate many Canadians are simply in a foul mood after 2 years of disruptions, risk, and uncertainty.
Remember this? The pot banging and singing, the neighborhood gatherings, the feeling early on in the pandemic that we're all in this together.
It's been a really wonderful opportunity to connect and to support each other.
Not so anymore.
If there has been change, it's been change for the worse.
After 2 full years of uncertainty, new research shows Canadians agree the mood now is darker and people feel more divided.
The ability to feel compassion or just a bit of kindness for people has really been scraped away.
The survey, carried out by the Angus Reid Institute in partnership with CBC News, finds a staggering 79% of Canadian adults say the pandemic has brought out the worst in people, and 82% say it's also pulled people further apart.
A large majority of respondents also say they're thankful to have been here in Canada through the pandemic. An acknowledgement from many the past 2 years were worse in some other countries, but it still doesn't help improve the mood here now.
Just ask those who've endured the pandemic in the hard-hit long-term care sector.
We feel defeated. We feel the future is still unstable. we feel that there's still a lot that needs to be done.
Canadians are timidly starting to come back together, like at this Toronto bar, where they've set up a re-socialization station for those comfortable enough to again meet strangers face to face.
Getting back into like hanging out again is almost like we're going out of our comfort zone.
I think really once we really start to reconnect, that I think a lot of those barriers that we threw up will disappear.
Anytime restrictions have eased and the weather's improved, Canadians' demeanor has warmed as well. There's hope for that again. The national mood, it seems, can only get better. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, Toronto.
To other news now. If you've been sneezing, blowing your nose more, or reaching for an antihistamine a little quicker, it's not just you. Health experts in BC say this year's allergy season could be one of the worst in decades. Rising temperatures caused by climate change mean pollen is in the air longer and for more intense periods. Our Janella Hamilton reports on what could be a very rough spring for a lot of people.
Shailene Kostiak says the simple act of taking a walk through the park this time of year can trigger her seasonal allergies.
Shortness of breath and just feeling like lethargic and yucky, constantly itchy eyes, stuffy nose.
Kostiak says pollen, trees, grass, and dust are some of the more common irritants that cause her symptoms to flare. Symptoms she says are even worse this year.
It's not something that is fun to live with. It takes away from your your life with your family, going out and having fun with friends.
Dr. Ross Chang says many of his patients, like Shailene, have been experiencing more severe symptoms compared to previous years.
There seems to be more asthma now than before, and we are seeing patients using more intense treatment for that.
Health experts say the increased severity of symptoms is largely due to very high levels of pollen in the air.
It started very early this year in January. That's unusually early, and we think it's connected with perhaps climate change. The seasons seem to be getting earlier and earlier as the weather warms.
And with warmer weather and more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, plants like cedar and juniper trees are producing more pollen.
Things are just going to continue to worsen unless we take solid action mitigating climate change.
She says some studies are showing a growing number of hospitalizations due to asthma attacks.
We've seen an increased number of visits to the emergency department in some of the worst days for pollen.
Experts say closing your windows and using an air filtration system can help provide some relief. But Kostiak says this year, even inside her home, her symptoms are often unbearable.
You are just completely stuffed up. Can't sleep, you're tossing, you're turning. It could last all week. And if you're someone that the allergy medication doesn't help, there's nothing you really can do.
A battle that will only get tougher for Shailene and for other allergy sufferers in the years to come. Janella Hamilton, CBC News, Burnaby.
Vancouver police say they have arrested a suspect accused of throwing hot coffee at a Tim Hortons employee in October. The force says 27-year-old Megan Russell was arrested last Friday and has been charged with assault with a weapon. Surveillance video captured a woman at the Tim Hortons near Abbott and Pender Streets taking a cup of coffee and throwing it in an employee's face. Police believe the act was unprovoked. Metro Vancouver prides itself on adopting environmentally friendly initiatives. When it comes to density, though, we've actually fallen behind. But as Radio Canada's Benoit Ferradini tells us, Vancouver is ahead of most by simply being the best in a bad field of candidates.
Julia Hine just needs to walk a few steps to go see her daughter and take care of her grandson.
Hello, we have a visitor.
On this lot, on Vancouver's west side, 3 generations live together. The Hine family just built this infill house for their daughter and her new family. It's one of the projects the City of Vancouver has encouraged for the past 10 years in order to densify its neighborhoods.
We don't have a lot of wealth, but we're land rich, and we can pass that on to our daughter to help with the density. So we're helping with affordability, we're helping with keeping families within the city, we're strengthening our community.
The young family hasn't driven its car since it moved in. The house is energy efficient and full of storage features. It makes Mary Hines' life easier in many ways.
It just made a lot of sense on so many levels. So, we were able to stay close to our family and be supportive. We were able to stay close to our jobs. I work just near Cambie and my husband's in Richmond.
The Vancouver area has been a North American leader in urban density for many years, not only because of its laneway houses, but also for its bike lanes and its urban planning around transit stations. But a satellite maps analysis with an artificial intelligence tool reveals that in the last 20 years, Metro Vancouver has lost 1% of its urban density. And while that might not be something to cheer about, Vancouver is faring well. It's a Canadian leader. The Ottawa-Gatineau area is bottom on the list, losing 18.5% of its urban density. In purple, you can see the new Metro Vancouver urban areas that have been built up in the last 20 years. Close to 570,000 new residents now live there. And those areas are ranked as low amenity density zones. And that means one thing: cars, and lots of them. Close to 80% of residents have one and need to use it. This analysis doesn't surprise Brent Todderin. He was Vancouver chief planner and is now a sought-after urban density consultant. He works for many cities around the world.
Although we need to accommodate more people, we actually have to accommodate fewer cars. So that means more trips by walking, biking, and public transit. We need to do it well and fast. And I think we've been failing in many cases in both of those, or at least certainly in the fast part of things.
To build for the future takes time, and it takes city bylaws that make it easy. Bryn Davidson built the Haynes family infill house, and it was a multi-year project. Even if he mainly works on family homes, Davidson knows that the best way to fight climate change is by putting up apartment buildings. He says that's something that has been made expensive and complex by Vancouver city bylaws.
There's a tendency to look at a single-family house and say, oh, that's valuable, that's something that we should protect, and look at an apartment building and say, oh, that's some scary developer.
In Burnaby, a major project is set to transform the Brentwood neighborhood, changing a place where cars once ruled into something very different and much more sustainable.
We particularly emphasize density around our transit stations, transforming former suburban shopping malls and big parking lots into high-density, mixed-use urban downtowns and neighborhoods with a lot of housing.
Brentwood is a picture of Metro Vancouver's sustainable future, and one reason why the region remains a leader. And according to Brent Toderian, it's projects like these that will allow us to combat the impacts of climate change. Benoît Ferradini, Radio-Canada, Vancouver.
A Vancouver man is currently hunkered down in a bunker in Ukraine as the Russian invasion grinds on. As Eva Yuguen-Sen shares with us, he's staying in that country to help bring in supplies.
When the invasion started, all the sirens started blaring, and immediately everyone realized there's a war now, and people start leaving and flooding to the stores and to the banks.
It's been 2 weeks since Russian forces began invading Ukraine. Since then, hundreds have been killed and injured, and thousands are evacuating from eastern Ukraine. Isaac Young flew there before the invasion to help a friend in case they needed to evacuate.
So we've set up a base here to organize different groups to move things around and to organize supply chains to bring things over across the border.
From this bunker in southwestern Ukraine, Young is helping collect medical supplies and defense equipment to send to the front.
It's things like essential drugs. They're rapidly depleting those things. Medical supplies like things for treating open wounds, for example, bandages.
People displaced from eastern Ukraine have traveled west. For now, the situation in the west is calm enough that Young feels he can stay.
And it's easy to leave and go back to your regular life. But I feel like with this kind of crisis, it's almost like your duty as a human being to help other individuals in need.
If the war escalates, he says he'll reevaluate and consider leaving. Eva Yuguen-Sen, CBC News, Vancouver.
And we'll have much more on the Ukraine conflict coming up in a few minutes. Johanna is taking the day off, so Fiona Odlum is here with the first look at our BC weather forecast. What's in store for us, Fiona?
It's time to say goodbye to all those clear skies and hello to rain. We have significant rain moving through. Now, it does start off overnight tonight and starts building tomorrow morning. So tomorrow as we get going, we're going to already see about 9 millimeters into Port Hardy, 5 into Tofino, and even 1 millimeter in towards Vancouver. But as we get going throughout the day, do not leave without your umbrella. Those numbers will really start to tick up into the Haida Gwaii Prince Rupert area, up to 30 millimeters by this time tomorrow. So a lot of rain coming down in a very short amount of time. We're also going to be watching for snow. As this low moves in and moves into the mainland, we're going to transition into snow. And this is going to be significant into the Squamish area, into the Alpine zone. We are going to be looking for potential travel concerns over the weekend. Okay, we're going to start our day tomorrow with a mix of snow and rain, 2 degrees in Metro Vancouver. By lunchtime, it'll transition to rain. And as the time we're getting ready to pack up and go home for the weekend, a little more rain.
Okay, thanks, Fiona.
Weather update brought to you by Allergy by Cirque du Soleil. Opens March 25th at Concord Pacific Place.
The war drags on in Ukraine. While Russia may be struggling on the ground, it's upping its propaganda campaign. The latest on the war of words is next. And thank you to everyone watching our commercial-free live stream tonight. Many Indigenous people are showing their support for Ukraine by wearing what are known as kukum scarves. As Hilary Bird explains, these bright, colorful granny hankies also highlight an historic connection they share with Ukrainians who first settled in Canada.
There's the scarf.
When Natasha Peter touches the vibrant floral blooms in her designs, she thinks of her grandmother.
It's like putting part of my grandparents into my artwork.
But now the Yukon fashion designer also thinks about Ukraine.
Very sad what's going on over there.
She's one of many Indigenous people across the country sporting what they call a granny hanky or kukum scarf in solidarity with Ukraine.
You're in my thoughts and prayers, Ukraine.
It began with this TikTok video highlighting the often forgotten connection between Indigenous Canadians and Ukrainians.
Because if you have a kukum scarf, put it on, wear it.
It's a relationship that goes back more than 100 years. In the early 20th century, thousands of Ukrainians immigrated to Western Canada. Struggling to survive and facing persecution from the Canadian government, the settlers turned to their Indigenous neighbors.
Our people, the Indigenous people, would teach about the land and also take early Ukrainians on hunting trips.
As the relationship grew, so too did trade. The floral beadwork of the Cree, Ojibwe, and Dene traded for the vibrant blooming stitchwork in the scarves of Ukrainian grandmothers known as babushkas that have adorned the heads and necks of matriarchs for the last century.
When I see the granny hanky, it just represents the strength of the women in my family.
It's the same strength and resiliency designer Vashti Etzel now sees in Ukraine.
I think it's quite touching that, we Indigenous people are showing our support this way because there's that connection that we have with the Ukraine. It's our way of keeping them in our prayers during this very difficult time.
They just hope people in Ukraine are hearing their prayers and feeling their kinship through these beautiful scarves. Hilary Bird, CBC News, Yellowknife.
war in Ukraine is now grinding into its third week. Russian forces are attacking civilian targets, but Ukrainian fighters have held off some advances so far. As Sasha Petrusik explains, ceasefire talks continue while the Russians are ramping up their propaganda campaign.
Street by street, Ukraine's port city of Mariupol is falling to Russian missiles, with its residential areas reduced to rubble. Civilians here unable to flee. Those in neighboring villages desperate for the little food Russia lets through, enduring cold, hunger, and thirst. Ukraine says 3 people died in Mariupol yesterday when missiles hit a maternity hospital, accusing Russia of deliberately targeting civilians. Russia first insisted it didn't know about the incident. Then it said the hospital was really a base for Ukrainian fighters. And today, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov dismissed the attack as a fabrication. This is not the first time we've seen pathetic outcries, he says, about so-called atrocities committed by the Russian military. Lavrov was in Turkey to meet with the Ukrainian foreign minister. First steps in peace negotiations that produced no results. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called Lavrov a propagandist, making excuses for Russian war crimes. You will be held accountable, he says. Russia's propaganda videos portray a military that is on the move in what it calls a special operation to subdue Ukrainian Nazis and nationalists. But its invasion has run into a Ukrainian military that's made the best of a smaller arsenal, destroying Russian tanks now in bogged-down convoys.
Yeah, they have a lot of people, a lot of tanks, a lot of their vehicles and techniques, but we fight in our land and we protect our families, so it doesn't matter how they fight. We fight like lions and they won't win.
In a war that is far from over. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Toronto.
More than 2.3 million people have now fled Ukraine. Countries along its western borders are taking in tens of thousands of people every day, with more than half arriving in Poland. The rest are reaching smaller neighbors like Romania, Moldova, and Slovakia, which are struggling to keep up with those influxes. The CBC's David Common is witnessing the arrivals near the Ukraine-Slovak border.
You get a sense of the mammoth effort to help evacuees in places like this. Slovakia, we're in the train station in the city of Košice, and you see volunteers, there's food that's being offered to evacuees, and evacuees who are, sometimes elderly, often a lot of kids and their mothers, the men having been left back in Ukraine, and they're taking whatever they could get out. Sometimes it's backpacks and stuffed animals and plastic bags, and whatever you can get your hands on. And the stories that we hear about the travel out, the frantic, horrifying journey, sometimes under bombardment, sometimes after having spent 7 days in a cellar or a bomb shelter to escape some of the air raids and the artillery attacks. Slovakia, though, is a smaller, not as well-off country as some others in this region, and so its ability to absorb this is limited. And so there really is an effort that once people get to border points, to get them out to places like this, to train stations where they can move beyond, move into other countries, move to where there are greater resources, because the numbers are just staggering and the need enormous. And not everybody here has somebody they can go to. And so it's not even clear where they will end up or what will happen when they get there. And of course, will they ever get to go home? And it's a question many people are wondering. They don't really have an answer to. David Common, CBC News in Košice, Slovakia.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, meanwhile, is winding down his European tour. He returns home tomorrow, but is in Poland today, where he got a first-hand look at the Ukrainian refugee crisis. As Travis Danraj reports, Trudeau met with government officials, including Vice President Kamala Harris.
Another trainload arrives at Warsaw Central. Hundreds of wary faces pile out into the station.
I believe in God. I believe in my strong dad. He will stay alive.
12-year-old Yuliania has arrived from Kharkiv, but is desperate to return.
I want to ask Putin to stop the war because I want to come back home.
50 of them here. At a refugee center in the Polish capital, Trudeau witnessed the crisis up close. The deputy prime minister next to him helped translate.
And we are all standing with you.
There was more money for aid organizations and $117 million for new immigration measures. Many Ukrainian refugees still require a visa. Trudeau promised to streamline the process and once again warned Putin.
Further use of problematic ways to kill civilians is going to be met with the severest of responses.
So far, the warnings, displays of solidarity, and economic sanctions by the West have failed to stop the invasion. The purpose of this trip was in part to develop new solutions which could possibly stop the bloodshed. But when pressed for what those new ideas are, the Prime Minister did not provide specifics.
He's going to lose this war because the ferocity and strength and resolve of the Ukrainian people defending their territory is inspiring us all. And because our resolve as friends and allies.
Trudeau met with another of those friends also in Warsaw Thursday.
I know we stand in solidarity in terms of our outrage.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris with the Prime Minister to show solidarity and discuss a path forward. The U.S., Canada, and other Western countries were already aligned on pushing back against Russia even before this trip. But so far, it seems unlikely that diplomatic pressure will do anything to dissuade Vladimir Putin. Travis Stanrash, CBC News, Warsaw.
What's next in our fight against COVID-19? Do you have questions about the new changes to our health regulations? Do you want to know if you should stop wearing a mask in certain situations? We have infectious disease expert Dr. Srinivas Murthy standing by to take your queries. Call us now at the number on your screen or send us an email. That's next.
Immigration has forever changed the face and the voice of Vancouver, in particular Chinese immigration. And nowhere is that more evident these days than in the sights and sounds of selling. There's been an explosion of Chinese language advertising in the city. But as we hear from Ian Hannamansing in tonight's Canada at Large, that's provoked a backlash.
It's a sign of the times in Vancouver. This ad in Chinese for gambling in Reno, Nevada has been popping up all over the city. And last month, an electronics store placed a Chinese ad in the Vancouver province, the first full-page non-English advertisement in one of the city's major English-language dailies.
We are taking baby steps. We feel that it's the right direction to go, but we're not sure exactly how to go about it.
Retail analysts say an increasing number of companies, especially in Vancouver and Toronto, are aggressively trying to woo Chinese-speaking customers, a market that isn't just growing quickly, but is affluent too.
They have a substantial portion of disposable income as well as wealth, and that creates a certain influence in the local retail marketplace.
And while mainstream companies have long advertised in Canada's ethnic media, now firms like BC Tel are spending unprecedented amounts, almost 20% of its ad budget, on slick, unique Chinese language ads. Consider the company's long-distance savings program. In English, it's called Real Plus, but in Chinese, a literal translation would suggest the calls cost too much. So an ad agency called LLT came up with a completely different name, the lyrical One Family, Four Oceans.
It communicates the basic benefit of the product or the unique features of the product, but in such a Chinese-oriented manner that it appeals very strongly to the Chinese audience.
But the Chinese language can be a very sensitive issue around here. For example, about a year ago in suburban Richmond, when a store said it wanted to hire people who spoke both Chinese and English, some English-speaking residents said they were being discriminated against. So perhaps it shouldn't be too surprising that some people find ads like these offensive.
I think it's rude. I think it's really impolite, and it's really like a slap in the face kind of thing.
Of course, a lot of people think the ad is just fine.
We're trying to capture dollars for our economy. If advertising in terms of marketing makes sense and it's going to help our country, go for it.
But remember that A&B advertisement? Well, there were a lot of calls to the stores, many nasty.
What I thought was racist comments, things like they have their own newspaper, that's ours. But frankly, I find that kind of response weak, bordering on pathetic.
But A&B says the Chinese market is too important to ignore. It's already planning its next Chinese language ad to run in the Vancouver province. Although the store says next time it will likely be accompanied by an ad in English. Ian Hannamansing, CBC News, Vancouver.
Major changes announced today to BC's COVID-19 rules, and the changes to mask mandates and gathering restrictions are welcome news for some, but many others still have questions and concerns. So for answers, we're joined by Dr. Srinivas Murthy. He's a clinical professor of pediatrics at UBC and an infectious diseases expert. Dr. Murthy, good to see you. First of all, what do you make of the COVID-19 health changes announced today?
Yeah, looking around the country and seeing what other provinces are doing, it was inevitable that British Columbia would follow suit with lifting mask mandates and lifting vaccine mandates. Is it the right time to do it? Looking at our numbers, they're going down. We're in a reasonably good spot in British Columbia. I am cautiously optimistic, although filled with a bit of anxiety.
Now, when it comes to what situations where you would still wear a mask voluntarily? We've seen a lot of people saying, I'm just going to keep it on. Are you among them right now?
I am. And so like when I get on a bus, when I go into a closed location, I'll be wearing a high quality mask because while I may be triple vaccinated and reasonably at low risk of severe disease, I'm not sure about everybody around me. So protecting those around me who may be more vulnerable should be something we are all considering.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know about vaccine cards that they're set to be dropped in early April. How do you think that change will affect the incentive for people who have not yet been vaccinated to do so, and particularly those who may have gotten the 2 doses but have not gotten that booster yet, because we haven't seen the pickup on that yet?
Yeah, and to be truthful, if you haven't gotten your vaccine by now, I'm doubtful the vaccine mandate itself is going to change that. I think those people who haven't gotten their vaccine are pretty firmly against it. Do I think lifting the mandate is going to change that? I don't think so. Is lifting the vaccine mandate going to change the safety of public spaces? That's a different conversation.
Are there other spaces where you would consider beyond whether it's a bus or whether it's a mall? We know that people can take them off in private homes now, where you think that perhaps we ought to keep them in place. For example, in schools for children or daycare 0 to 5, where we know that kids cannot be vaccinated yet.
Yeah, those are great questions. And so buses, malls, hospitals, all of those things, I will be wearing masks. Mm-hmm. Schools are a bit more tricky. The less than 5 age range hasn't always had good mask compliance. In the 5 to 12 age range, where our vaccine uptake isn't very great, across Canada it isn't very great. Should we have mask policies there? There will be some controversy there. Do I think it's absolutely required that all children wear a mask at all times? Not necessarily, but a direction towards wearing masks more often than not is probably recommended.
We have a question from Jenny Porter. She works in healthcare. She has a 1-year-old child, too young to be vaccinated, as we know. How can I keep her safe? I know this is a broad question, but she says, my partner and I realize we can't keep her safe forever. She will be starting daycare in a few weeks. But how do we keep her safe from COVID as we can until she is able to be vaccinated? A broad question, but any generics or specifics?
Yeah, it's the same rules we've all been applying for the past 2+ years now. We know how this virus is transmitted. We know how to protect ourselves, and doing those things and expecting those things of the people around you too when you're at high risk situations. And so if you feel uncomfortable without people wearing a mask, you should be able to tell them that without having much controversy attached to it.
Scott would like to know, is it safe for my 75-year-old triple vaxxed mother to go grocery shopping without a mask?
Like, it's hard for me to say yes, no, it's safe and not safe. I think wearing a mask is something that I choose to do because that's what I think is most safe for both for myself and the people around me. Each person is going to have to make their own choices. Dr. Henry said it's more of an empowering approach. We'll see how that plays out.
Kelly would like to know, and again, these are specifics, and there's only so much you can answer, I understand, but Kelly says, I'm 42 years old, 36 weeks pregnant. She's been working from home to avoid Omicron since pregnant women have a higher risk of requiring hospitalization, experiencing more severe symptoms. How risky is it for me to go back to work at the office in the last few weeks of my pregnancy?
Yeah, and so if she's well vaccinated, I think her risk is reasonably low. She can apply the precautions that she's been applying thus far, possibly with mask wearing, and with her triple vaccinated status, her risk is reasonably low in our current environment. Is the risk going to change in the coming months with increasing case counts possible? That may be, but I think the next few weeks should be okay.
Okay. Another question from Sally who would like to know, children get vaccines for measles, mumps, etc. Why is the COVID vaccine seen by some parents in such a different situation?
Yeah, that's a complicated question that we've been trying to unpack for the past year and a half now. I think it's new, and people are still slightly fearful of it being a new vaccine. We do know that it's been given to tens of millions of children all around the world, and it's very safe in those cases. And so I think we're getting past the place where it's considered new, and hopefully part of our routine vaccination series.
How do you see a possibility that in the future, when it comes to COVID vaccines being integrated perhaps with flu vaccines, what's the possibility that it can be bundled with other vaccines that people would normally get or will be encouraged to get?
Yeah, that's a great plan. And lots of companies are working on combo products, combo flu plus COVID vaccines and other things like that, so that we avoid lots of needles for those who are needle phobic while still getting all of the protection we need. We really have no idea how frequent we'll need future COVID vaccines, whether it's going to be an annual thing, a every few year thing, or whether the 3 doses that we have right now are enough to last us a long time.
A question from Tanya. It seems inevitable there will be some cases of COVID, even though cases are down. I've read, she doesn't cite a source, that COVID is impacting our brains. Will lighter Omicron, if it could be called that, pose a problem for our brains? I don't want to take the risk of going without a mask.
Yeah, of course. And there's all sorts of questions that still linger about COVID-19 and what it does to us. We do know that long COVID or long-term symptoms are real, and they have a huge impact on our public policy. And this brain question is something that we have to look at very carefully as to which organs are mostly affected by COVID-19. The rates are still very small compared to the large population who have had COVID-19. And so I wouldn't necessarily make huge policy changes about that specific finding yet, although we do really need more data on that.
Okay. Children get, we already had the question from Sally. Given what we know about this vaccine and this disease and the various types that it's formed, Dr. Murthy, how much of how good is the basis for, I guess, being able to treat this with a 1 dose later on, and particularly around the research with the question around brains? How good is the base of knowledge we have that we can get answers to those questions in the future?
Yeah, all sorts of scientists are looking at this exact question. And so hopefully more answers will emerge over the coming months, specifically related to those long-term impacts. Will our vaccinations protect us against many of these things? Without a doubt. I think our first and second tools of prevention. And if you haven't been vaccinated or haven't gotten your 3 doses, I would highly recommend that happen.
And just wrapping up here, Susan would like to know, my husband and I are 75. We have our grandchildren visiting overnight. Is it silly to ask them to do rapid tests before they come over? We've heard that concern from others before.
Yeah, this has been a chronic concern over the course of this pandemic. And now that we have more accessibility to rapid tests, it's something that we can respond to. If you feel more comfortable with getting a rapid test, that's fully within your rights to it's not silly, let's say, to Sally.
Okay. Dr. Srinivas Murthy, clinical professor of pediatrics and UBC and infectious disease expert. We very much appreciate your time and your expertise. Thanks for joining us.
Have a good evening, Dan.
You too. It is a new model toward home ownership. Companies that help you jump onto the property ladder by helping you with a down payment. The risks for the market are up next. And at 6:40, almost 4, a live look at the Port of Vancouver. We are tilting to the damp as we head into this weekend. Your complete forecast is coming up after this.
If I were to fall in love with an element, it would have to be carbon.
Carbon's the life of the party.
You'll know when carbon walks in.
Carbon's just annoyingly good at everything.
Because of carbon energy.
Life has become longer, health's better, all because of this sort of free gift.
So how did I come to be the most talked about but least understood element on Earth?
The levels of carbon pollution have increased dramatically.
It's not carbon's fault.
Know that carbon dioxide is building up.
It's going to lead to coastal flooding, droughts, storms, and we're approaching a tipping point.
Carbon is profoundly important in the universe. She is what makes us possible.
There's a direct line from the birth of carbon in stars to the birth of us and all of the life around us here on Earth.
Wow. I'm a participant in a great unfolding story in the universe.
My generation feel viscerally that their future is at stake.
Nothing is more urgent to survival than understanding carbon and where she likes to hide.
Wherever I find life, it's going to have some carbon chemistry, just the way I do.
We have to learn to get along with carbon, and she's very happy to get along with us if we treat her right.
Builder or destroyer? Which do you want me to be?
Whenever you've had a really good night's sleep, do you ever wonder why? Beyond the obvious rest, what's the point of it?
Why sleep? Scientists have been asking this for, well, you could say people have been asking this for millennia.
Sleep is a very interesting mystery that we're all kind of attracted to in some way, shape, or form.
Sleep is one of those big questions still left in science, or why we sleep is one of the big questions. We don't really understand it yet.
It seems a strange animal behavior, because when we sleep, we lose consciousness and control. And that can be a problem.
Sleep has to be more important than being eaten by your predator, or you wouldn't do it. If sleep isn't absolutely essential for survival, it's the single biggest mistake Mother Nature ever made.
They're the most studied and famous whale family in the world. What's pushing J-Pod to the brink? I'm Gloria Makarenko, host of the new CBC British Columbia original podcast, Killers. Is it too late to save them?
Johanna is taking a well-earned night off, so Fiona Odlum joins us again with a full look at the forecast. We can say goodbye to the sun for a bit, eh, Fiona?
Over the course of the evening, we are going to be transitioning from that really nice weather we've had into some unstable weather. So first of all, we're looking at these gale force winds all along the coastal region. We're going to be looking for some wind gusts into the 30s and 40s. Whenever you see this board, I want you to add another 10 kilometers on it. It's always off by 5 or 10. So in the Comox area, we're looking for wind gusts into the 50s, possibly even 60s, Tofino into the 30s, and Ucluelet into that 40-50 zone as well. Well, this is what's coming our way. we're going to be looking for significant snowfall through the mainland into the Alpine region, but we're also going to be watching for all this rain. It's really interesting here. As we look off the island into the mainland, we're going to be looking for a transition from snow into rain. You can see this boundary here that's going to start pushing in this warm air, and we're going to be looking for cold air on the other side of it. So that's why we're going to be looking for all this snow moving through. This is going to be significant snow matched with significant rain. And unfortunately, this pattern is going to continue well into the rest of the month. Once we get through that low, we're going to see another one bubbling up. Now, this one's interesting. It has a bit of cyclogenesis on it. Doesn't it sound like an Avengers character? It's going to be swirling, and it's going to be stagnant, and it is going to bring consistent rain. All right, so tonight, this is what we can look forward to. Rain in Prince Rupert and 4 degrees, 4 in Victoria, 1 in Port Hardy, and looking at -10 tonight in Cranbrook. You have a little bit of cold air coming your way. So tonight, we're looking for 3 degrees tonight in Vancouver. Overnight, dropping down a degree. When we get started in the morning, we're going to see a snow-rain mix and then transitioning to rain throughout the rest of the day. So what we're looking for is significant rain. We could see up to 100 millimeters of rain over the next 3 to 4 days. Don't forget, we're going to be springing forward on Sunday, and unfortunately, that rain does continue for the next 7 days.
All right, let's hope cyclogenesis doesn't make a sequel. Thanks, Fiona. We know this all too well in Metro Vancouver, but home prices are soaring in Canada. That's making it tougher for first-time home buyers to get into the market. A new company is helping prospective buyers with down payments. But as senior business reporter Jacqueline Hansen tells us, it comes at a cost.
For many young Canadians, buying a house is becoming further and further out of reach.
The things that are priced under $1 million are generally like floors optional. Did you need a ceiling? How do you feel about electricity?
Lauren Schreiber, her husband, and 2 young kids rent 1 floor of a house in Toronto, where the average home price hit a record $1.3 million.
We've been saving all along, but the price of what we need to get in keeps rising.
All our co-owners also have access to a rainy day fund.
A Canadian company called Arboro is trying to help bridge that gap. It co-invests by contributing to the down payment. The homebuyer puts down at least 5% of the purchase price. Arboro pitches in to get it to 20%.
A larger and larger amount of some homebuyers are accessing the bank of mom and dad, and we're here to provide that for those who don't have access to generational wealth.
What's it like to buy a home with Arboro?
But the company's cash isn't a gift. If Arboro contributes 3/4 of the down payment, it gets 3/4 of the property's appreciation. When the owner sells, they pay Arboro its share. But if they don't sell within 10 years, they still have to pay Arboro back with appreciation. For Schreiber, those terms seem worth it.
Finally, there's a little bit of hope.
Arboro is really just capitalizing on rising prices.
But some in the real estate industry are concerned companies that add more investor money to the market could drive home prices even higher.
When house prices become so unaffordable that we need these types of companies to jump in to, quote unquote, help people get onto the property ladder, it's not a good sign. It's not a solution.
Co-investing in a down payment isn't new, but different options come with different terms. From a federal government program for first-time buyers limited by purchase price and income to a nonprofit developer in Ontario that only co-invests in the units it builds.
It's a concession to go into home buying with strings attached, but in order to achieve it, this is what we have to do.
Part of a generation that feels buying a home without some form of help may be the only way. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Toronto.
It's called Zoop Soup. It's not a lunchtime trend, don't worry. Who it's feeding and why? We'll explain that next.
Just watching the stretches alone for Goldball, you can tell this is going to be interesting. Then there's the warm-up drills. Really intense. Meet Peter Parsons, Mason Smith, and Nick Gentleman. All three are legally blind, but just to ensure everyone's world is complete darkness, these are part of the gear.
This is completely blind. You can't see anything with this. Your vision's useless with these shades on.
So now it's equal for everyone?
Equal for everybody.
Well, they can't see anything, they can hear, and that is crucial in this sport. There are bells in the ball. That sound gives the players the cue on which way to dive. The net they're protecting, it's huge, the entire width of the court. It isn't just the sound of the ball that helps them anticipate how to move. These lines on the floor are put down before every game. They are raised, and players feel both the floor and the back of the net to get their bearings. Peter, Mason, and Nick are all members of the National Training Program, and Peter's just back from the Goldball Americas in Brazil, where Team Canada won a bronze. That qualifies them for the World Championship and begins the road to qualifying for the Paralympics in Paris.
They only take 8 teams in the Paralympics. It's down from 10 teams to 8 teams, so not easy to qualify. Goalball's quite an international sport, played all throughout the world.
Natalie Seguin coaches the national team. She's here for a mini training camp.
Actually 3 Nova Scotia players on the national team pool, young guys and veterans as well. So we're aiming to build, and they have a lot of players, upcoming players as well. So for sure there's good depth in Nova Scotia.
And part of that depth, younger players like Mason and Nick.
That I get to wear a Team Canada jersey. It's been a dream of everybody since they were kids. Especially, being a Canadian kid, who loves sports, it's always been that, man, wouldn't that be so cool to represent your country one day?
So being a visually impaired athlete, it's awesome to get to be around other people that have been through the same stuff and, experience the same thing in life. And, the sport really gets to bring everybody together, and we're like a big family.
Right now, what Nick, Peter, and Mason are training for, the Canadian Championship next month in Calgary. COVID has taken its toll on competitions. This will be their first national championship in 3 years, and they are so ready to dive back in. Colleen Jones, CBC News, Halifax.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
On March 16th, join the Black Business Association of BC and the cast and crew of CBC's new hit series, The Porter, for a conversation about diversity and inclusion in TV and film. The free virtual event will explore the panelists' experiences filming The Porter and discuss the importance of Black inclusion in film. Learn more and register at blackbusinessbc.ca.
Some rice farmers in California are offering something called Zoop Soup. Don't worry, it's not some weird, trendy new brunch thing. It's a delicious meal for tiny salmon. The farmers are creating a habitat for the fish by flooding fields. That provides nutrient-rich water full of zooplankton to help the salmon fuel up on their way to the ocean. Take a look.
So if you were to go back in time and just look at this landscape, 300, 500 years ago, this would all be a giant floodplain. And this was habitat that Chinook salmon, which are very important to California, used to rear on their way to the ocean. A lot of that habitat's gone now, but we have 500,000 acres of this stuff, California rice. Most of the sushi rice in the US comes from this area, and we think it can be useful for salmon conservation.
It's really important for us to try to do what we can do for salmon in the valley. They are struggling. What we're trying to do is really to try to reactivate this floodplain and give the salmon a little bit of this floodplain back.
We track their growth so that we can put acoustic tags in them
when they're big enough.
It's important because we're losing species. So our current estimates are that about 83% of the native California fishes are in severe decline, and salmon are no exception. So we want to do something about that. We don't want to just sit silently while extinctions happen. We want to use science to create programs that can actually help.
Thank you for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, which is our free app, or check us out anytime on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and on our website, of course, cbc.ca/BC. Our next local news is at 11 o'clock with yours truly, right after the National. Good night.